Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Truth Defender podcast. We are coming to you from the greatest country in the world, the great Republic of Texas, deep in the heart of the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas, more specifically. I really appreciate everybody stopping in on the Friday evening. I know everybody's probably got plans, and it's been a long week. I know it's been a long week out here. Work week's been kind of dragging on, so we finally made it. So applaud everybody for that. If you guys aren't already subscribers, please consider hitting that subscribe button for us, as well as that bell icon, so you don't miss an episode when we go live or put an episode out. Also, don't forget to smash that like button for us, and it really help us out with the algorithms as well. If you are on the go and want to check us out, you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio and Amazon Music at Truth Defender Podcast. If you love what we do here on the show and you're feeling generous, please consider sharing the show with a friend, family member, or colleague. That would really help us out as well. If you have any questions for myself, as always, or a guest, as well as guest or topic recommendations, you can shoot us an email at truthDefender1776@gmail.com. We'll have links to all the social media down below: Twitter, Kick, Instagram, Rumble, all that good stuff, as well as a link tree for all that. It's been a minute. I know everybody saw that we were supposed to have a couple of shows that were supposed to be up and running. We had some technical issues that we were running into. So we kind of had to run a lot of checks and things that we had to do on that side. So I finally got everything back up and running. Our guest was having issues previously getting on to the streaming platform that we use. So they were not able to get on, but we're trying to make arrangements to have them back in the future. So be looking out for that as well. But without further ado, my next guest today is Mr. Nigel Harry Watson. Nigel Watson has researched and investigated historical and contemporary reports of UFO sightings since the 1970s. He writes a monthly column, Saucers of the Damned, about UFOs for 14 times, and regularly writes book reviews for the Pelicanist. Yeah, Blogspot. He has regularly contributed to Magonia, All About Space, Starburst, Aquila, History Today, Fate, Flying Saucer Review, UFO, Brigantia, Northern UFO News, The Unexplained, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, and Outer Limits Magazine. He's also contributed to the Dark Lore Anthology series and to several books edited by the late Timothy Green Beckley. For the reliability of UFO witness testimony, edited by VJ Ballester Olmos and Richard W. Hayden. He's also contributed a chapter on the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, which we'll have linked down below in the show notes as well. Mr. Watson has a degree in film literature from the University of Warwick and a degree in psychology from the Open University. Mr. Nigel has also worked as a copywriter in London and now lives in Plymouth, UK. Without further ado, Mr. Watson, how are you, sir?
Great, thank you. Hello.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you mentioned it's about 2 a.m. out there. So I really appreciate you staying up late with us, sharing your time. So we really do appreciate that. Yeah. So you have a pretty list, like a long list of, contributions and all that that you have right in there. I guess the UFO topic is pretty heavy. Has that always been heavy with you throughout your life, growing up interested in UFOs, or is that something that you recently kind of got into?
I got into it really in the early 70s, like you say. So mainly in the 70s and 80s, I was writing quite a bit about UFOs and investigating cases. And ironically, in the late 90s, when the X-Files and all this excitement about UFOs and the millennium coming, I wasn't so into UFOs at that time. I sort of read a few books, but I kind of pedaled back a bit, mainly because I'd done a lot of research in the 70s. And then in the sort of 90s, other things were going on in my life. I moved to London and got married and had children, things like that, sort of normal things. And then I kind of came back into it sort of about 2010, something like that. And then I started writing a bit more again. And then ever since then, I've kind of kept an interest. And with doing the Fortean Times column, it means I sort of monitor the news about UFOs sort of almost on a daily basis. And a lot of things has been happening in in ufology, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years anyway.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of the latest information that's been coming out. I we've all seen here in the U.S. Kind of those hearings on UFO disclosure that have been out recently. Now we have reports in the news saying that there's some kind of foreign object that's hurtling towards space that should be here at the end of this year sometime. What do you think is, I guess I'm always kind of a skeptic. I always look at the darker side of things whenever people in power or the government is pushing, let's say disclosure of UFOs. I think immediately that there's some kind of distraction operation going on. Are you kind of in the same mind? Because I don't think they would freely kind of release information saying that, yes, it's true. I mean, we all know it's true outside of the government, so we don't need them to tell us that. But I mean, do you feel that the government just kind of freely releases this information, or do you think it's more of along the lines what I think is that they release it to kind of distract from other topics in the news or things that are going on around the world? I mean, that's kind of what I think.
I think governments can be quite deceptive, but it's something we should consider is the fact that governments have lots of different departments. It's just not one overriding force. It's different agencies, particularly in America with the, CIA, FBI, NSA, and different private organizations. And even in Britain, I think sometimes there's been a cover-up, sometimes just because they can't be bothered to investigate it. In fact, only today I was looking at a report of a Welsh UFO crash in the early 80s, and fragments were found and analysed, but there's no positive solution to what these fragments were. But somebody's investigated it further and found out that the so-called UFO crash was actually caused by a section of an American aircraft actually coming off and crashing into the Welsh fields in a sort of remote part of the country. And so these fragments were collected by, I think, the British Ministry of Defence. And so there seemed to be a sinister purpose about it, but we've only really realised that it was actually wreckage from an aircraft rather than a UFO. And obviously we just covered it up because there would have been a big inquiry. And it's a factor that people won't be happy if it was an American military jet doing this. It'd be bad enough if it was an RAF jet, really. And so there seems to be probably a bit of cover up there, and also to have UFOs implicated with it, then it sort of would send any serious researcher away. And I think this is what's happened in the past. The authorities have preferred people to think a UFO crash has happened than anything related to a real, say, secret craft. There's also the mystery of a Kelvin photograph. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's supposed to be one of the best pictures of a UFO. And it was taken in Scotland, and some people think that was a picture of a test aircraft of some sort, but the jury's sort of out on that. Some people think it might have been a hoax, and so it's a kind of complicated story. And I think that helps any agency that wants to hide anything, because even if the so-called truth does come out, ufologists will always say, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? So I think that's a problem with pinning down things, really. And even the CIA has admitted that a lot of sightings in the 1950s were probably caused by their spy planes at a high altitude. So that airline pilots saw these strange things, and they were due to CIA spy aircraft activities. But then some people have also denied that. In fact, not all of these cases could be explained that way. And I think that's another thing about ufology in general. It's easy for somebody to slap on a label, saying overall military, overall disinformation, when I think it's more complex than that. And I think that's what fascinates me about the subject, is that there's so many facets to it.
Sure. What is so like here in the U.S.? I mean, it's pretty universal, I guess, around the world. I mean, everybody has an interest in UFOs and strange things like that. But I mean, I've never really got an understanding of kind of what the British people feel about UFOs. I mean, is it kind of like it would be here in the U.S.? I mean, we have certain groups of people that are in all the way completely on UFOs. Others don't believe it at all. And then other people don't really care, don't really know. But I mean, some of the biggest kind of UFO stories, I mean, Rendlesham Forest is obviously one of like the major ones that comes to mind. But I mean, what's kind of like the sentiment out in the UK with things like UFOs and those topics?
I think in Britain there's a fair share of believers, people who are promoting Rendlesham, like that Welsh UFO crash, and people have been promoting them. But there's quite a lot more skeptics as well, I think, in Britain than in America. And I think that's true of European ufology in general, but we're more likely to look at the history of a subject, whereas Americans are more likely to look at their classic cases of Betty and Barney Hill and Roswell and Area 51, and everything seems to happen in America, and it gets the most publicity. I think another factor with British ufology is it's probably not followed by the public as much. We have tabloid newspapers that cover it, and sometimes there are serious articles on the subject, but I think generally British people don't really care that much. I think Americans are a bit more excited by that sort of thing, probably because America's at the cutting edge of space exploration and new technology, whereas I think with Britain, there's probably not so many remote places as well where you can hide secret aircraft and things like that. So I think people generally are quite skeptical or even disinterested, whereas I think in America you've had all these senators calling for disclosure and Senate meetings, and so I think it's a lot more important subject in America, just because it's got this tradition of having now these famous cases. Like you say, even our Rendlesham Forest incident happened near an American Air Force base and involved American personnel. There might have been one or two British witnesses. It depends really, because I think another thing, as time goes by, cases get more complicated. People turn up and say they also saw something, or different theories come along. And I think Rendlesham Forest, one explanation is it might have been some sort of military aircraft or experiment. And then other people say, oh, it was a hoax or testing whether rumours would spread. So so there's still quite a lot of different theories and explanations about even Rendlesham Forest, and there's so many different stories about that. Somebody saying they had a digital code downloaded to them when they came near the crash site and things like that. And I think even a case that's been so well publicized, it just gets more complicated over time. And it was quite interesting as well, though, that the British authorities kind of covered it up and didn't want to talk about it. But through the American Freedom of Information Act, official documents actually did come out. So the British then had to admit that something did happen there. But if it hadn't had an American connection, it would have probably taken a lot longer for the British to acknowledge something had happened. And so there's all these sort of sinister aspects to it, but there's also the fact that some people think it might have just been a prank, or that it occurred over a New Year period when people might have been, drunk or probably not as attentive to what was really going on. And, people might have been pranking or messing about. So like I say, I think you've got to be vigilant with any UFO case, and it does take you down a lot of different avenues. I think with me, I don't have any particularly strong agenda to prove UFOs or aliens are from outer space, or whether they're ultra-terrestrials, or whether they're just something the government uses to cover up things. I think you've got to be open-minded, and every case has a different set of features that you need to, examine in more detail. And it's quite fascinating, though, even an old case like that Welsh one, it's only in the last few weeks somebody has dug up more information. They dug up an old newspaper report, and then they followed it up by contacting the local Air Force base that flew that aircraft, and they got an acknowledgement from their archives that this had happened. So I think even an armchair ufologist can check out things, and luckily for us nowadays, there's so much information on the internet. There's so many newspaper archives, and also many governments have put all their UFO material on the internet. The British put theirs on quite a few years ago now, and so anyone can sort of look up these files. And it's usually quite disappointing, though, because a lot of the files just have the same information that normal UFO magazines carried anyway. There's not usually a great lot of revelation. And it is a bit frustrating that there's no smoking gun. There's a website called the Black Vote that collects massive amounts of government data, and even that doesn't, it reveals a lot of what was going on behind the scenes, but it never really reveals, something like, oh, we recovered a spaceship and took it to Area 51.
Right. Yeah, it's a bit frustrating in that sense. It's always just enough information released just to keep people wanting more. And it's just like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You guys keep coming. But like, that's why I've always been so frustrated with those kind of hearings that we have here in Washington, and it's just the same thing over and over again. Yeah, we have reports of this, and there's a famous story about this, and then they bring in people that are experts, but then they can't say anything further than whatever they've been um, told they can say, and it's just like the same hearing over. It's been the same one for years. It's nothing new.
And you get a lot of so-called deathbed confessions from veterans, and often usually quite ludicrous stories. It's almost like with their last breath, we've got to tell some fiction that supports people's ideas. Really, it's a bit, and there's so many different whistleblowers, and a lot of them just seem to come out with different stories. Or
right.
you wonder whether there was some program at some stage where the military show people alien film footage or give them documents just to see if those documents are actually leaked, because you'd be able to trace it to the people who've shown strange information to. And it would be a good way of tracking, if anything's being leaked out to the media or to other organizations. I think that was a problem with one particular whistleblower who had contacts with people in Russia and foreign scientific organizations. And so the FBI were quite keen to investigate them. In the end, I think we did let them carry on with their scientific research. But sometimes some of these people working in different agencies that can believe in UFOs, and even if the department doesn't believe in it, so they're doing it as a side hustle, and that can get them into trouble if they're liaising with foreign governments.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's obviously only so much they can kind of reveal. You can see in one of the comments here by Bob, technological advantage, keeping advanced technologies under wraps to maintain a strategic end. Now that just goes to the fact that if they are reverse engineering aircrafts or technology that are coming from other planets, other galaxies, what have you, it's only to think that if we have some kind of advanced technology that we're taking from them, we obviously don't want to share that with the Russians or with the Chinese, even though they steal everything anyways. But we don't want to really advertise that we have such powerful weapons or technology out there. So I mean, there's that aspect as well. But it's obviously, that obviously works both ways. It's the double-edged sword. We don't want to hand that over to our enemies, whoever they are, but they use it as a form of kind of, how would you say, controlling their own people as well. Obviously, we don't want to advertise those kinds of things that they could turn on us for whatever reason, but it's definitely interesting. I just feel like, like I mentioned previously, that all of these kind of leaks and when they have hearings and new information, and it's just kind of I guess it would be just like distraction. I mean, there's a lot of things that have been going on obviously in the world currently. I mean, wars and things in Gaza, and all of these wars in the Ukraine, and kind of all these crazy things, and then it just seems like right out of thin air something just falls on our laps, like, oh, there's a crazy UFO or something coming towards us now. That one was like far out there. That one was just, I did not see that one coming. It's just like, there's this giant object that's coming towards Earth now, and it's just like, wait, what? Like what was going on in the news at that time? And then you kind of go back and see like, oh, well, this was going on. But that was like throwing a Hail Mary. Like that one's really out there.
But it's interesting though when there's Chinese sort of weather balloons came over the United States about a year or so ago, but were shot down. But they, unlike most UFO reports, are quite elusive. These were kind of firmly observed from the ground. They were tracked on radar. They were shot down, and so there's something positive there. And whereas even these UAPs, or that might be caused by drones, they're quite elusive. You don't hear of anyone actually shooting one of these UAP drones down. And there again, you've got a new label for UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And at the end of last year. And, some people I think statistics show there are acceleration. And so they're making out these are sort of like non-human intelligences that are operating these UAPs, and that they even can affect people's psychological state of mind. But in a way, I think UAPs are just a new label for UFOs, but put forward as a better way to try and put pressure on Congress.
Yeah, I would kind of, the FAA, which is here in the U.S., they regulate anything to do with drones pretty heavily. I mean, you can't have drones any larger than, I don't know, I would say like a basketball that are flying up in the air. But I mean, I don't know if you were aware, I'm sure it was news all over the world, but we had those unidentified drones that were happening on the east coast of the US a few months back, like in New Jersey and there. People were reporting that were like giant, I guess, Volkswagen sized drones that were flying around.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have anything like that that the civilian population here in the US can use. Like, you'd have to go overseas and buy something and then bring it back here. But even then, they'd probably find it and then you'd have to get rid of it or something. But I mean, that was something that was going on. That was actually pretty crazy. They were saying that they were seeing them leave the east coast of the US and they were like going back out over the ocean towards, I don't know, China or somewhere. It was just like a crazy story. But, the Chinese have no regulation on any of their drones. They have giant, freaking car-sized drones. And, so that, I don't know where that came from. I mean, that would be considered unidentified, obviously, but I don't believe that anybody in our government had absolutely no clue what was going on then.
Yeah.
Even though they say they didn't.
I think you've got to consider eyewitness testimony as well. Back in the 1970s, some UFO hoaxers went to Warminster, which was a UFO hotspot in Britain back in the 60s, but they visited the place in the 70s. And on a few occasions, they launched just a hot air balloon with a torch beneath it. And we got all sorts of stories of people seeing, UFOs with searchlights and beams. And one of the reporters said that it was surprising, even a small torch bulb can, when it's launched into the sky at night time, can project a really powerful light. So I think with these sort of drone sightings and things, it could be quite a tiny drone and you can get quite powerful LED lights now. So it would look quite large. And also if it's with, say, a couple of other drones, it could look like a triangular spaceship, because if you get three lights that form a triangle, and then it sort of, your mind makes it seem like it's a one solid craft. I think that's another thing that, misperception can cause a lot of UFO reports. And also some people can get more excited by quite mundane things in the sky because they're not really aware of what's going on there. I've had people ring me up and say they've seen UFOs on the horizon, and it's obvious they're just searchlights, and
Right.
or even satellites. On one occasion, I was driving home when I lived in Scunthorpe, and I saw a massive fireball across the sky, and it looked so impressive, and it looked really large. And I think because it was quite large and bright and fast, it almost seemed like it was going to crash into the ground. It seemed a lot lower than, say, a normal meteor. And so, in a way, some event like that, like a fast moving meteor or even a satellite, can cause people to think they've seen something spectacular. And I think that should be factored in with these UAP sightings, because I think people have also exaggerated the speeds and things, and people generalize. You get one report where somebody says, oh, it was going 30,000 miles per hour and all this sort of thing. But it often depends on how far away the object was to the observer. If it was close, it would seem it was going faster than if it's further away and seemed to go
Right.
slower. So it was something that even Kenneth Arnold had trouble working out, because he's the one who triggered the term flying saucers, and he saw 9 discs over the Mount Rainier, and he estimated that the craft were going like 17,000 miles an hour, which was impossible for any terrestrial craft at that time. But it meant it depended on how he used his calculations, really, and how far away these objects were. So I think quite a few people have played with the maths. So it depended on how well he timed it and how far away these objects were. So I think that's something we have to think about, that some people think they saw something for a minute when it was perhaps 10 seconds, or
Right.
we can't judge speeds, and even professional pilots have trouble estimating the distance and speed of an object if it's at night time, because there are no reference points. It's better if you've got some radar confirmation, but even radar can be fooled, and that's something you have to consider. Even cameras can lie, and it's very difficult getting out of any proof that something somebody said was moving at 30,000 miles an hour and going into the sea. It's anecdotal, really.
Sure. Yeah, I know it's. I have a hard time judging distance, standing in front of things, or judging height. I always say like, "Oh, that looks like it's about 6 feet off the ground," when it's not, and it's actually higher. It's so you just imagine trying to like judge how fast something's going in the sky. That would be, it's like who knows completely. But yeah, that's I've always found that, especially if it's just like a random encounter, and you have people that have no clue of aviation or anything to do with that, and then all of a sudden they're giving speeds and distances, and it's like, well, maybe, but it's I'm not I don't really hold that as credible, but who knows. Now, obviously, since the UK is obviously a smaller island out there, do you kind of run into more, you mentioned UFOs going into the water. Do you kind of run into more UFO, like underwater UFOs? Is that something that's more, I guess, prevalent out there? I know out here it's not that much of a big deal, but
no, I've not really come across that many UFOs going into the sea, even though I now live in Plymouth, which is near the sea.
sure.
But I think occasionally, even in the 1930s, you had stories of people seeing what they thought were aircraft crashing into the sea. And I think what
Right.
happens is people are seeing meteors, and they can seem like they're going into the sea rather than the fact that they're actually flying away into the horizon. They might actually go in the sea, but the thing is, I think that sort of thing can happen, or something that might be flying away from you over the sea can just disappear under the horizon, which could also give
Right.
that appearance. And when you think about it, it's fairly physically impossible for say just UFOs to be operating in our skies, at high speeds and doing other weird maneuvers and things. And then to think we're going into the sea as well, which is no new area of dealing with pressure and speed and propulsion. And so these craft, if they are a physical craft, must be really incredible. And I suppose proponents would say, well, if it is extraterrestrial, it would, of course, have these magical abilities. But I think we've got to go back to, like I said, about witness testimony and testing that really before you start. I think it's a big leap going from witness testimony to then generalizing and saying, this is what they are. And I think that's a problem with a lot of UFO books. They cling on to an idea and then they'll cherry pick a few cases and then apply it to the whole subject. And in my book, Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited, I've tried to just present the stories as have been told to me and not to try to put it into any framework where you're trying to push a certain theory. And I think that's a problem with a lot of UFO books. They, especially new ones now, they basically just search the internet and pick up all the famous stories and
Sure.
look at other books. But most of the major UFO books, they just want to sell a story to entertain people. They're not there as textbooks. And so authors often cut out anything that undermines their theory. And also you need to look at the wider context of, the witness themselves and the situation they're living in. Because like now people see UAPs and drones, whereas a few years ago people were seeing orange glowing lights, which were Chinese lanterns. And
Mm.
so it goes through different phases. At one time in Britain, we had a mini flap of phantom helicopters, people, but the actual sightings were just like UFO sightings, really. Were
Mm.
like UFO sightings, but people said, "Oh, that's a phantom helicopter," and the same applied to the pre-World War One period in 1909, when people in Britain saw lights, they thought they were German Zeppelins, surveying the countryside in preparation for an invasion. So often things in the sky are interpreted in terms of the latest technology, or perhaps technology just beyond our grasp. And that seems to be what's happened over time. Like after the Second World War, people saw ghost rockets, and that was just after revealed the V1 and V2 technology, and
Right.
so and those sightings were as elusive. I think in Sweden, there are hundreds of sightings, and even sightings of one going into a lake, but we've dredged the lake and never found any fragments. Whereas if you get a real object, you usually find physical evidence for it. Like those Chinese balloons, they did actually physically shoot them down. Whereas there's so many stories of UFO dogfights that nothing occurred. There's no uh, the object doesn't seem to be physically real. That might be just it's caused by a meteors or plasma, or in some cases pilots have chased balloons, high atmospheric balloons, and the higher of them ability to investigate. So I think that's the problem, that you've got think how people interpret what they see, rather than in terms of what we expect to see.
Sure. Yes, we had another question here. So it says, Nigel, what is the most evidentiary case that gives us evidence of all the sightings? Shag Harbor Tic Tac is the Tic Tac hours. So I'm assuming they meant just hours in general, as in the human race hours. I don't know, maybe it belongs to a specific country, but he said that the Shag Harbor, the people said it was a plane, and the military said it was UFO. So,
Oh yeah, I think I'm not too familiar. Well, I've heard of a Shag Harbor case, but I'm not too well up on that one. But there are quite a few crash cases, beyond Roswell, really, that have got their own little mythology and lore to them. There's the Aztec UFO crash, where they said, the military retrieved this thing from a sort of mountain location. And I'm not that convinced by them, really, because I think somebody called Leonard Stringfield, he collected all these stories of crashes and military encounters, but most of them are kind of rumors and badly sourced stories from anonymous people. And often, if something had crashed, you know, um, as have all these things gone to Area 51 or what?
sure. No, I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, you obviously, we all hear the stories about, crashes, and, right on the heels of it, military or other groups, Men in Black, all those kinds of
Yeah,
things that obviously pop up, right after. Even for people that see them, they get visits the same night or the next day, and things like that. So those are always, I guess, kind of consistent. But um, I'm very I'm curious to kind of know. I mean, do you go around kind of chasing people down? Do people get in contact with you? Like, how does that whole thing kind of start when it comes to stories on your end?
all right. Well, when I first became interested in the subject, I helped set up a UFO group, and we did go and interview people. And with my book, I visited people and interviewed them, and visited them several times, and sort of got them to check that the story was correct and everything. But in recent years, I've been more of a kind of reviewing the subject through the internet, and just through contacting people online. But for my book, I did speak to Paula Green on Zoom, and interviewed her that way, really. So it's easier to interview people using Zoom and other technology nowadays, rather than having to actually physically visit people. Although obviously that's a better way of doing things. But I think with my book, I studied quite a lot of high strangeness cases, and one or two people were really quite intense and even depressed by their encounters. And I felt it was really quite difficult dealing with them, and I didn't think I had the real resources to help them entirely. I could point them in the right direction, but I felt that with some high strangeness cases, some of the people who are reporting really odd things need some help from some healthcare professionals as well. That was something like some ufologists would say, well, that's because a UFO sighting or an unusual encounter might trigger mental disturbances and make somebody who's already depressive even more depressed or anxious or fearful. So or you could just say that this anxiety and depression has actually caused the sightings. But either way, I think you got to be mindful about how you tackle people who have really intense and strange encounters. I think generally, most UFO witnesses and things, are okay to deal with, really. But I think all you can do is sort of tell these people that a lot of these experiences are felt by people throughout the world, and we're not as sort of abnormal as they might think. So I think that does help people.
Sure. Yeah, I was also going to ask, how, what would be your approach to kind of verifying the authenticity of, witnesses' accounts and, things like that? Because obviously you write books and you occupy a great space in the topic, and I'm sure a lot of people want to put out hoaxes, and they know they can come to you with stories, and they just want to make stuff up and they embellish, things like that. But what how would you say you kind of get around that? I mean, obviously I'm sure you've probably found people coming to you with stories that you've kind of said, this is a little bit too far out there, this might not be true. I mean, there's only so much, pardon my French, but there's only so much crap that someone could tell you before you're like, oh wait, this is a little too much for me, like this might not be true.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think the people I've included in my book, I think all are really genuine, and I don't think any of them have hoaxed it, because they're quite intense experiences that have occurred to them over quite a period of time. I think a factor is, if you do insert yourself into somebody's sort of story, there is the problem that you might encourage them to elaborate and have even better stories to please the UFO investigator. I think that's what happened with Bud Hopkins. He had a group of abductees who were trying to outshine each other by having better stories to please Bud Hopkins. So in a way, you don't want to be too involved with some of these people. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of tell you what you want to hear. And that was another thing that we did when we did speak to people. We didn't really tell them about other cases or anything. Often, they'd find out through reading books and things anyway, but we didn't really encourage them to look at the subject from one way or another, or to tell them about other cases. But I suppose that is a problem. It's also something that happens with ghost hunters, where they get involved with certain families, and then they become almost like part of a family, and then they have to sort of generate more ghost sightings to keep the interest going, really. So I never really got involved with any case like that, but I think you've got to be aware of all these things because you're dealing with people. And I think another thing is that even if you might be able to come up with an explanation for a case, often people are quite negative about that. I think, say somebody sees a light in the sky that they think is a flying saucer, but you say, well, it was a moon behind clouds, they're more likely to not believe you and think, oh, it really was a sighting, really, especially if they've got excited by seeing it, and you feel a bit
Mhm.
of a party pooper if you do explain things. Yeah, I think that's why there's a lot of hatred towards, so-called debunkers. But I think for real other ufologists, I think uh, in my case anyway, I was just trying to record information. I don't think you'd have to have a massive team just to try and prove one case, and we just don't have these resources. Um, and even a case like Betty and Barney Hill, it was only investigated by a journalist, not by a ufologist. I think they did get involved with Betty Hill and everything, but other than Walter Webb and one or two other people uh, investigating it, it wasn't as well researched as you'd expect from such a famous case. And that's another thing, having resources. Even if somebody reports seeing a light in the sky, it can take quite a lot of work to find out what might have caused it. You have to sort of look at astronomical charts, satellites, data, or check air routes, or whether it's just it could be just a kite with a light on it, or a balloon. There's so many explanations, and also it depends on the circumstances of a witness. You know, were were they in an agitated state? Did the sighting take was only a short-lived sort of sighting, which has kind of uh, made an impact on somebody, and then we kind of elaborate on what was just a light in the sky into a flying saucer. So there's quite a lot of work involved with any particular case.
Sure. Now it can be a little tricky. I understand. I mean, we all, I guess, kind of want to believe. I mean, I would love to believe,
Yeah,
that there's something out there, and but you got to kind of step, take a step back and look at all the information, because I mean, believing in UFOs and people from other planets or whatever, objects or creatures or whatever coming from another galaxy is already in and of itself a large leap, just at base level there. So, there's going to be people, especially like you said, that, they see some kind of monetary value out of it. And, maybe some of them have shows or they have podcasts that are doing really well and they're making money, and, they kind of have to drum up other experiences that, maybe didn't happen, or maybe if something not so serious happened, they kind of have to embellish a little bit more just to kind of get, the attraction there. But
yeah,
it's a little hard to kind of, pick and choose and, kind of sift through the weeds there. But yeah, it's a bit rough. But I guess I was kind of taking a look through the book there. Is there any kind of, I guess, story that stuck out to you the most, that you were really kind of intrigued, that you investigated, that you kind of feel that everybody should really take a closer look at?
all right. Well, um, the Paul Bennett case that I deal with at the beginning of the book is quite fascinating, because I met him when he was a young teenager, and he saw things like a 12-foot tall robot, and he saw a sort of 3 foot high little, what he called a mini man in black, and he had various ghostly experiences and things, and also he was kind of a leader of his friends who also participated in looking for UFOs, and also he was very influenced by the writers of John Keel and the ultra-terrestrial theory, that they're not aliens from outer space, that they're actually some sort of intelligence just in a different dimension from our own, and that they can just come into our own realm whenever they chose, and we're sort of trickster figures. And he was impressed by that sort of theory, and he wrote quite a lot of notebooks about all his experiences. So I found him a really fascinating person, and even now, it's sort of interested in this in Earth mysteries and that kind of thing. And he's a sort of intelligent person as well. But in a way, you could I look at it as why it was shaped in the form of a UFO story, you know, perhaps in the past, children would have perhaps seen religious figures. There's a famous Fatima case of the three children seeing the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then on several occasions, and seeing a light phenomenon in the sky, which people like Chapellet have interpreted in a UFO context. So I think that's the thing about the people I've spoken to, is why these experiences are shaped in terms of UFOs rather than in terms of, fairy lore or religious things. And it's probably down to the kind of society we live in, but it's it's hard to just identify one case, because we're all different and got lots of different features to them. And some people, I think some people would just want to say, well, it's just childish imagination. But I think what I was trying to do is collect data on stuff people eliminated, because I think that's really bad that ufologists claim the government censoring and hiding information, but ufologists are quite notorious for censoring cases and hiding it from other ufologists. So,
Sure.
I think you've got to be kind of open and transparent.
Yeah, there's a lot of gatekeeping in the UFO world. Unfortunately, it's the same thing with, like the Bigfoot community as well. And then there's a whole bunch of different groups. And if you're not a part of the group, nobody really wants you to be poking around. And a lot of people have like their belief on it, and they, obviously feel very strongly that what they've experienced is, the truth, and they don't like other people changing things. And it's the same, I guess, kind of group thing. Which is unfortunate for a lot of things, not just this, but it's particularly rough in the Bigfoot community. I've noticed over the years, speaking with a lot of them, and interviewing a few of them on the show, and they get really hostile when you kind of challenge a lot of the information they have, and it's not very good.
Well, I remember writing. I wrote a sort of short skeptical article and showed it to somebody in my UFO group in the 70s. And he was outraged, and I never got it back off him. And
Yeah.
in a way, we're trying to get people to believe in the subject, whatever we're trying to peddle or whatever. But if you're going to start doing things like that, it's ridiculous, because I think you've got to look at different angles, really, and not just pursue one idea, the spaceship idea or the ultra terrestrial idea, or pinning labels on the subject, like, saying that everything's sleep paralysis or false memories or things like that. People like to have categories and labels, and I think the debunkers can be as guilty as we, hardcore believers. So I think there is a sort of middle ground where you've got to I think you've got to be skeptical to 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 be able to have a good perspective on the subject. Otherwise, you can just get sucked into this the rabbit hole of saying, "Oh, it's all government." Uh, suppression of the data and all this sort of thing, and you just run round in circles. A classic case was Donald Kehoe in the 50s and 60s. He ran the NICAP, the civilian group, which were really well organised, but he was forever banging on at the government to release their files and disclose the evidence. And really, things haven't changed, 30, 40 years later. People are still pursuing that goal. When you think, well, why don't we just go out and interview these people? The government can't stop people seeing UFOs, so why not investigate the cases the governments haven't got hold of?
Sure. Yeah. The unfortunate part is, when we speak about people that gatekeep and they, the people that are trying to debunk are just as guilty as the people that believe wholeheartedly that, they've experienced things and, they exist, is that you get the people that actually experience things that are stuck in the middle. Then you get the debunking side of the field where they're harassed and they're called crazy and, these things. And, they don't want to speak up. So, they have experiences and things that they've gone through, but they don't want to say anything because people are going to call them crazy. Or, you didn't really see what you saw. And, so that side of it is obviously bad because you're forcing those people to never want to. I mean, how many stories in the history of civilization do you think have gone or were never reported because of the same thing? There's probably been some amazing stories out there that we'll never know of because they probably told somebody, like they told a friend or they told a relative, and that relative was just like, dude, don't ever tell anybody that because you're crazy, or, you didn't actually see what you thought you saw. And that person was just like, oh, okay, well, I'll just, I'll hold it in forever. And they actually did. And then that encounter went to the grave with them, and, we'll never see it or hear it. So it's unfortunate. I've seen a lot of people. I was in the military for a handful of years. So I can tell you from firsthand experience that there's several people in the military that I know personally. A lot of them are pilots as well, but for fear of losing their wings and never being able to fly again, they're never going to tell anybody those stories. And it's quite unfortunate. There's a lot of guys that I worked with as well. I used to work on the East Coast here of the U.S. I'm in Texas now, but I used to live on the East Coast of the U.S. And there was at a nuclear facility, and we had sightings over our site several times, just because of the nature of what we did there. And yeah, there was a lot of people that would see things and they would report things, or not actually report them, but they kind of talk amongst each other, and some of them would share stories with me. But everybody there had top secret clearances. They worked for the government, and those stories will never come out. So it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, I think having that attitude actually makes things worse, because if people were able to tell these accounts, they could be better investigated and tracked down. In fact, it's quite a powerful security issue there that, in a way, an enemy force could just trick up a drone to make it look like a flying saucer and go around with impunity, because anyone who'd report it would be laughed at. I think the situation in America is probably a bit better now. I think people are taking the subject more seriously. In Britain, I don't think there's still quite a sort of thing about it being something sort of a stupid subject, really. Whereas I think in America there's a bit more mainstream belief in the thing. But I think that's what hinders the subject, that people don't come forward, and it's tricky because you don't want to be too negative about what people report either. But I think sometimes you've just got to tell people what you think might have caused their sighting or experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. A lot of people are just, afraid, and I understand. A lot of the guys I know afraid to lose, retirement pay, or, they were in the military for over 30 years and they're afraid to lose their pension and, stuff like that. So it's quite unfortunate, but we'll just have to wait, hopefully we get back to those deathbed confessions in the future. We'll see some more of those. I have no doubt. So yeah. Well, Mr. Watson, as we kind of wind down here, you've been very gracious with the time. I know it's past, I guess, 3 a.m. over there in the morning, so we don't want to keep you up too much longer. But I guess, is this going to be like a standalone book? Do you have any plans of like a series in the future or different books, anything like that?
Well, I wrote a book called UFO Investigations Manual quite a few years ago. So considering it's going to be, is it 80 years of flying saucers in 2027? So I was thinking I might revise that book and bring it up to date, because so much has happened in the last 10 or 12 years. And I'd like to add something about all the American cases and how it's become a subject of that's rebranded itself as UAP, and also just to look at some more of the more obscure theories about the subject as well. So it'd be more of rather than an investigation manual, which it never really was, it will be a better overview of a subject. So some newcomer to the subject can get a hold of it and look at the history and look at the different theories, because I think the problem is on the internet there's so much stuff on, and it's really hard, even if you're an expert on the subject, to really get a grasp of what's going on. There's so many aspects to the subject, like you were saying, like military people are seeing things, or people are having bedroom invaders, abductions, things like that. So there's a wide gamut of things, and also there's so many different experts and so-called experts on the subject as well. So it's a sort of minefield, really.
Sure. No, absolutely. It's crazy how many experts there are on one subject or another, but yeah, everybody with their own kind of angles, obviously. So it's interesting to to kind of get a broad perspective on the things, and what each person kind of believes and the experiences they've had. Obviously, no one experience is the same, obviously, but I'm always interested in kind of seeing any kind of experience that comes from like UFOs or the unexplained that come from around the world, just kind of where they come from and how the people react towards them, especially like you mentioned in countries like the UK, where it's not really mainstream at all, and a lot of people kind of poo-poo the idea of UFOs and things like that. So it's always interesting to kind of get that perspective on it as well. But now you mentioned your previous book. Is that available for sale on Amazon, or where can they find that book?
The investigations manual, there's a few second-hand copies available on Amazon, but like I say, it was written about 10 or 12 years ago, so it was really well produced. There was lots of colour pictures, and I look at the things like close encounters of first, second and third kind, and look at ley lines, theories about whether UFOs came from Mars or from Zeta Reticuli or whatever. So I've kind of looked at also different types of investigations throughout the world, referencing Project Blue Book and things like that. But I think it could do with an upgrade, really, because there's a lot more information available now about different American projects that have looked at the subject, and also just the fact that quite a lot has happened in the last few years, really, and that so it needs a bit of an upgrade. But in a way, with Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited, it's based on a book I wrote back in the sort of late 70s, and it was actually published in 1990. So now 35 years later, I've had a chance to chop out some bits and add new cases, and I've also added some of the latest theories about these sort of encounters. And I've also added a bibliography of the main British UFO books that talk about British UFO cases, because I need a huge volume to do a concise history of British ufology. So what I've done is just written up my cases, and then people can sort of look up these other books as a kind of supplement to my book, really. So it's a sort of bit of a guidebook, and I've also referenced different archives. I've got loads of UFO material relating to British cases.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we'll be on the lookout for anything new. Obviously, I hope if you ever decide to kind of revise those books or come out with a new one, you'll keep us in mind and maybe come back again and share those with us. But for everything else, we'll have links to the current book, Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited, down in the show notes as well for everybody. You can get that on Amazon US and Amazon UK. You can also get those on collectiveingbooks.com as well, which we'll have linked down below. I guess if anybody would kind of want to reach out to you, I'm assuming Facebook, maybe X would be, or Twitter for for those people out there still. But are those kind of the way they can kind of get stories out to you as well? Because I'm sure a lot of people out there will have a lot of stories after this.
Yeah, you can get me on Nigel Watson 1 at gmail.com. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch. But I'm on Facebook as well. So they can always try and contact me that way. Sorry.
No worries. Awesome. Yeah. So we'll get that out as well. So that was Nigel1 at gmail.com. So we'll have that linked in the show notes as well for everybody. You can see that down here. So we'll have links to the books, and everything down below. Like I mentioned, if you ever, we're all live here, we're rocking and rolling. So everything that pops up, it's all on me here. So we have different screens going on, and so it's a good thing. But like I mentioned, I do appreciate your time, Mr. Watson. I appreciate you staying up late with us. It's Saturday morning early, so I'll let you get some rest. Do appreciate it, and we'll be keeping in touch. Hopefully I can send over a few stories that I have as well. Maybe we can kind of discuss those in the back end.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So I really appreciate the time. Stay safe out there, and I hope to speak to you soon in the future, and have a great morning.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a great one. All right, everyone. I appreciate everybody's time today as well. Friday evening. I hope everybody had a great work week. It's been a long one, I know, on my end as well. But we had to get this show in. So we're kind of in the process as well. There's a group that I was reaching out to. I mentioned that we had the previous guest we were supposed to have on the last couple of times, which was Robert Baer, who was a near-death experiencer. So he has a great story as well. Ex-police officer, he's really well-rounded, and he had a great story. So he's a part of a group called the Spiritual Awakenings International, where they collect stories and they help people out that have had near-death experiences. So we are kind of in the process of being affiliated with them. Trying to help out, share stories about people they've had. So that's kind of in the works. We're in the talks, and just having a few interviews going on with them and seeing if we kind of fit. If they enjoy what we do here, and if it's a fit for everybody all around. That might be something that's coming up in the future. So that'll be something that's in the works. So hopefully we have an answer to that in the next couple of weeks or so. If so, we'll have a lot of the people that they have on their end, people that have had near-death experiences. So that will be something to look forward to as well. But yeah, I hope everybody has a great start to their weekend. It's been a long one, like I said. Everybody get some rest out there. I know I need a little bit of sleep, so I'm off to go eat, and then pretty much do nothing the rest of the night. So I'll be seeing everybody here soon, hopefully in the near future. I have some great guests that are confirming. So we're setting up times and dates and all that good stuff. Might be doing a solo show here shortly. I guess in the next couple of weeks sometime. So I'm still making up kind of my mind. There's a lot been going on in the news, obviously. But I'm really, really curious about this new supposed unidentified object that they've discovered hurling towards Earth. It's supposed to be here sometime the next few years or something like that. So that's something that I need to get my head wrapped around a little bit more and try and find out as much as I can. So we might be sitting down and doing a little show on that. So everybody stay tuned for that one. So I appreciate everybody stopping in. Like I mentioned, have a great start to your weekend. Get some rest. And as always, if you guys aren't already subscribers, please consider hitting that subscribe button for us. Smashing that like button as well. That'll help us out with the algorithms. Turn on your little bell notifications so you guys get notified when we go live or when we post anything. If you're on the go and want to check us out, you can still catch us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio and Amazon Music at Truth Defender Podcast. If you love what we do here and you feel like helping us out, please consider sharing the show with a friend, family member, colleague, all that good stuff. That really helps us out as well. Questions for myself or a guest and topic recommendations, you can shoot those over to thetruthDefender1776 at gmail.com. Links to show notes, link to Mr. Watson's books, where you can find them on Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff down below. Twitter, Kick, Instagram, Rumble for us. We'll have a link to the link tree as well. Yeah, guys, appreciate it very much. We'll be catching you guys on the flip side. Take care out there. And as always, God, family, Texas. Night, y'all.